The sky above Earth hadn't changed in years. Same dull gray clouds, same fake blue tint cast over the cities by weather control satellites. Humanity had grown used to the silence, too used to it. For nearly 300 years, no alien contact, no interstellar threats, no messages from deep space. The galaxy, it seemed, had grown quiet. But that wasn't peace. That was a pause. Back then, people thought the elders were myths, ancient beings said to have shaped the order of the stars themselves. Humans first heard their warning 500 years ago, carved into the walls of an asteroid deep beyond Neptune, a message etched in impossible script, decoded only once, and then dismissed. Do not cross the line of fire. Do not awaken what sleeps. Your kind is young, stay low or perish. But humans don't listen. Not when curiosity burns hotter than fear, and so they crossed it, the line of fire. A vast, invisible border that cut through the galaxy like a scar, a line the other species feared to even speak of. Beyond it lay ancient ruins, lost technology, and something else, something no one truly understood. The expedition was supposed to be small, quiet. But when humans found the vault of Velsar, they did more than poke around. They took. They triggered something buried, sealed, hidden away by civilizations far older and smarter than Earth's. And just like that, silence ended. The first sign came quietly. The outer colonies, gone. No distress calls, no wreckage, just vanished. Then the hallucinations started. People across the galaxy reporting the same dream. A black ocean, a whispering voice, and a door creaking open. Earth's high command brushed it off. Mass hysteria, they said. Shared psychosis. But then came the ship. It entered Earth's system without warning, without sound. It didn't match any known design. It was smooth, dark, like obsidian melted into the shape of a blade. No engines, no weapons, just presence. All communication satellites failed instantly, power grids in orbit fried. And then, the message played. It wasn't in any language, yet every human who heard it understood it in their own tongue. You were warned. Panic followed. Earth's leaders scrambled to assemble the fleet. The top scientists were dragged out of labs, interrogated, blamed. And when they learned what had been taken from the vault, a sphere no bigger than a heart, pulsing faintly, it was already too late. The sphere began to glow. They tried to contain it, tried to shield it in quantum stasis, deep beneath the surface. But containment never worked on things that weren't meant to exist. The voice returned. This time in minds, not ears. Millions heard it. Some wept. Some went mad. Others simply walked into the sea and never came back. The sky changed. Stars began to vanish from telescopes. Not blink out. Vanish. Whole systems erased. Lights erased from space itself. Something was coming, and space itself was folding to make room. General Soria, one of Earth's last war veterans, stood in front of a war table full of flickering data and dying signals. She'd fought the Kari Dominion, survived the collapse of Luna, and stared down 3 rogue AIs in her time. But even she looked pale. "This is what they were talking about," she whispered. "The elders weren't warning them. They were warning us." There was silence in the room. Then one voice broke it, the head of Galactic Sciences, an old woman with a cracked voice and trembling hands. "What we woke up doesn't want revenge," she said. "It wants correction. Earth prepared, as much as it could. Fleets mobilized, colonies were evacuated. Every nation stopped fighting each other for the first time in a century, but humans didn't really believe it, not fully. They always thought they'd win. Somehow, after all, they were human. They had beaten back extinction before. fought gods, machines, and each other, and came out stronger. That was the spirit that led them past the stars. But this time, they weren't facing something that wanted to win. They were facing something that wanted them undone. The world didn't fall apart in a single day. That's the thing no one tells you about the end. It doesn't come with fire raining from the sky or the ground splitting in half. It comes slow, quiet, like a sickness spreading behind smiles. At first, people kept going to work. Trains still ran. Markets opened. News anchors kept lying with polished teeth, pretending everything was under control. But something had shifted. People felt it in their bones, like a weight in the air that couldn't be named. Like walking into a room and knowing someone had just died there. The object, what they called the Vel sphere, was still deep underground, sealed in a containment facility beneath the Siberian wastes. A place not even the top-tier military AI had access to anymore. After it began to pulse, strange things started happening. Time glitches, memory gaps. Entire conversations repeated like déjà vu loops. People near the sphere began to act. Off. Not possessed. Just not quite right. Their eyes didn't blink properly. Their voices held a rhythm too perfect, like a machine pretending to be human. Dr. Reina Talos, the chief physicist on the project, hadn't slept in 4 days. She used to be calm, brilliant, composed. Now she looked like something had crawled out of her dreams and whispered into her soul. She kept writing equations no one understood, not even the supercomputers. "It's rewriting our reality," she muttered to herself, as she stared at a chalkboard full of symbols no human language had ever known. Not invading, not destroying, rewriting. When they brought her in to brief the high command, she didn't sugarcoat it. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "It's not a weapon. It's a correction tool, a failsafe. We triggered an automatic cleanup protocol from before time as we understand it. This isn't war. This is something older than conflict." Someone in the room laughed, a forced chuckle. "So what, like a galactic antivirus?" She turned to him with hollow eyes. "More like a reboot." The room went quiet after that. Meanwhile, in orbit, Earth's defense fleet had tripled. Ships bigger than cities hung in low atmosphere, buzzing with life and weapon systems powered by artificial suns. They pointed every rail cannon, grav pulse torpedo, and antimatter shell they had toward the black ship, the Harbinger, as it came to be known. Still, it did not move. It hovered at the edge of Earth's gravity, completely still, as if waiting. The ship didn't broadcast anything. No energy spikes, no activity. It just was. But then came the second one. Not from space, from underneath. Deep in the Mariana Trench, a second structure was detected. Identical in shape, dark as night, and older than the ocean around it. It didn't rise. It just appeared. Sensors confirmed it had been there for millennia, maybe longer. Cloaked, sleeping. The moment it surfaced, the tides changed. Not just water, gravitational tides. Moons in orbit shifted slightly. Tectonic plates all over the Earth started groaning, earthquakes, floods, power plants failing without reason. Nature began to unravel, like code being corrupted from the inside. The elders had said, "Do not awaken what sleeps." Humanity had awakened 2 of them now. General Soria stood with her hands behind her back as reports poured in. She watched the live feed of the Mariana Harbinger emerging from the sea, towering like a god made of obsidian and shadow. "We fired the first shot," she said, mostly to herself. "Now we wait for the reply." But waiting didn't mean sitting still. Earth's leaders declared Emergency Order 77, activating every contingency plan written for alien contact, dimensional breach, and extinction-level threats. Cities were evacuated. Underground shelters opened for the first time since the AI wars. Scientists worked round the clock, trying to find a way to neutralize the Vel sphere, to reverse the signal it was sending. But it wasn't just Earth in chaos. The colonies were hearing the whispers, too. From Mars to Titan, people were seeing visions, voices in the stars, languages they had never learned but could suddenly speak. Entire settlements went dark. On Europa, they found a mining team inside a sealed dome, all dead, frozen in place, smiles on their faces. Not fear. Peace. They had sat down, hands folded in their laps, and waited to die. Back in orbit, Earth's fleet waited for orders. Commander Naeem, who led the flagship Ardent Hope, requested permission to fire preemptively. "We can't just sit here, General," he said over comms. "We've faced extinction before. We beat the AI rebellion. We crushed the Kari invasion. Whatever this is, it bleeds. We kill it." But Soria hesitated. This wasn't like before. She could feel it in her gut. Then, the Harbinger moved. Not in aggression. It rotated, slowly, pointed toward the moon, and fired a beam of pure black energy. The moon cracked. Not shattered, cracked like glass under pressure. A fault line ran through it, glowing faintly red. Within hours, pieces began to drift apart, pulled by distorted gravity. Earth's tides shifted again, weather spiraled, skies turned violet. And something else, stars were missing again. Entire constellations blinked out. The message came again. Not spoken, not written. It arrived in dreams. Every child on Earth, every child across the colonies had the same dream that night. A door, a hand reaching through it, and a voice saying, "Return what was taken, or be undone." The Vel sphere pulsed violently. Earthquakes hit every continent at the same time. Then it stopped. Dead silent. No signal. No readings. Dr. Talos wept when she saw the data. "It's watching us now. Like we're a variable in its formula. We have weeks, maybe less." In a last-ditch move, Earth's High Command held a vote, a decision that would go down in history as either the bravest act of defiance or the last mistake of a dying species. They voted to fight. They sent everything. The fleet engaged both Harbingers with everything they had. Waves of ships, automated drones, plasma missiles, grav bombs. The sky lit up like a second sun. The atmosphere trembled under the power of humanity's wrath. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like it might work. One of the Harbingers tilted slightly. A small rupture formed along its hull. Then it responded. Not with weapons, but with sound. A single tone. Low. Unbearable. It rang across every frequency. Shattered glass, burst eardrums, scrambled electronics. Ships fell from the sky like leaves in a storm. Pilots screamed as their minds were torn open by something too large, too other to be understood. The entire Fourth Fleet vanished. No wreckage, no debris, just gone. Earth's orbit became silent again, but not calm. The message returned one last time. "We offered you silence. You chose defiance. Now we offer you mercy, memory. Become what you were before language, before will, before self. Become unmade." Back on the ground, Dr. Talos took one final look at her notes before burning them. "What we took from the vault," she whispered to the soldier guarding her, "wasn't a key, it was a lock." He didn't understand. Most wouldn't. She smiled bitterly. "Everything we are, everything we built, was because they let us forget. Let us evolve without knowing what came before. That was their mercy." The soldier asked what she meant. She looked up at the sky, where two Harbingers now hovered like executioners above a guilty world. "They erased something before," she said. "Some older version of us, some mistake. And we just reminded them it's still here." Everything slowed down after the harbingers answered. The global internet collapsed within hours of the attack on the moon. Not from damage, but from fear. Too many people uploading the same dream. Too many trying to find answers, flooding every channel, drowning every feed. Entire databases shut down under the weight of human panic. Every voice wanted to be heard, but none of them knew what to say. For the first time in centuries, Earth was quiet. Cities still buzzed, lights still flickered. But people stopped speaking unless they had to. Stores were abandoned, schools closed. Even the most hardened skeptics were silent now. They'd seen the moon break. They'd watched the Fourth Fleet vanish like dust. Everyone knew in their own way that this wasn't a war anyone was going to win. They just hadn't realized yet. It wasn't a war at all. General Soria sat in the command chamber of the Vigilant, Earth's last remaining command ship in orbit. Her skin looked pale under the glow of failing consoles. The ship's systems were glitching. Time loops, flickers in space-time readings, false alarms that turned out to be real alarms a few minutes later. Reality itself felt unstable. She stood alone now. The rest of High Command had either retreated underground or disappeared entirely. She played the Harbinger's last message again. Not through speakers, those were fried. It had to be played in her mind, through a direct neural relay. Risky, but there was no other way. We offered you silence. You chose defiance. Now we offer you mercy, memory. Become what you were before language, before will, before self. Become unmade. That phrase haunted her. Become unmade. What did that even mean? The scientists had theories. Too many. Dr. Talos said it was a dimensional collapse. Others whispered about quantum reversal. But the most terrifying theory didn't come from the experts. It came from a janitor in the bunker where the sphere was kept. He'd been scrubbing floors when the sphere pulsed. The lights flickered. He fell into a brief trance, no longer than 30 seconds. But when he came out of it, he could speak 8 ancient languages fluently, including one no human had recorded before. They ran tests on him, MRI scans, EEGs. Every part of his brain had lit up during that moment, like he'd remembered something that wasn't his. When they asked what he saw, he simply said, "I remembered being erased once. I remember screaming as I disappeared." This is the second time. In the Mariana facility where the Vel sphere was stored, the alarms had stopped working. The scientists were still there. But none of them had spoken in 3 days. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't seem to want to. They just stared, scribbled notes in impossible symbols, smiled at nothing. And when one of the guards finally broke protocol and stepped inside to pull them out, he didn't come back out. Cameras showed him standing perfectly still in front of the sphere, then kneeling, then bowing, and then glitch, feed cut. They sent in drones after that. The feed returned. The room was empty, no bodies, no heat signatures, just the sphere. Now floating 3 inches above the floor, spinning silently. They debated nuking the site, but even the AI models warned against it. Every scenario ended the same way: escalation. Meanwhile, across the colonies, humanity's footprint was being peeled away like old paint. On Mars, the atmosphere domes collapsed one by one, but no explosions followed. Just a soft, bright white mist that rolled in and made everything quiet. The terraform reactors powered down not because of damage, but because the fusion cores simply stopped existing. Satellites orbiting Jupiter captured something even worse. Entire mining rigs on Ganymede had vanished overnight. And in their place? A perfect geometric spiral carved into the ice, glowing with the same dull hue as the Vel sphere. That was when the message changed. It wasn't in dreams anymore. It was in memories. People began remembering things that didn't happen. Cities they'd never lived in. Skies they'd never seen. Oceans that shimmered with colors no human eye could process. Families that weren't theirs. Wars that weren't written in any history book. Reina Talos was the first to realize what was going on. "The Harbingers aren't attacking us," she whispered in a cracked voice. "They're overlaying us." She drew it out on a piece of paper. 2 circles, one representing reality, the other something ancient and overlapping. "They're replacing what we are with what we were, before, the erased version." "What does that mean?" someone asked her. She stared down at her trembling hand. "It means they're not killing us. They're restoring a backup." Down in one of the few underground sanctuaries still running, a boy named Kyo sat beside his mother as she cried. Not because of grief, but because she didn't recognize him anymore. She kept calling him Arvin. She swore he'd died in a flood years ago. But Kyo had never drowned. He'd never even seen an ocean. He remembered who he was, what his real name was, but deep down, he could feel it slipping, like water through fingers. Memories that weren't his kept pressing in, heavier every hour. He remembered walking through burning metal forests, riding creatures with no legs but infinite speed, fighting battles on top of stars. He was 11 years old. He should have been scared. But part of him liked it. Part of him missed it. The final global broadcast was transmitted 3 days later. A joint message from what remained of Earth's leadership and the Unified Colony Council. It was short. No false hope. No grand calls to arms. Just acceptance. A warning to any distant outpost still in the dark. If you're hearing this, do not come home. Earth is not safe. Something ancient is rewriting our species. This is not extinction. This is overwrite. And then, forgive us. We knew the elders warned us. We just didn't believe it would come. Above the earth, the Harbingers finally moved again. They came closer, not fast, not like a strike, but like gravity pulling them in. People all over the planet collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads. The sky turned black in daylight. The stars twisted into shapes they weren't meant to hold. Languages bled together. Animals stopped responding to natural instincts. Birds circled in infinite loops. Dogs barked in patterns. Insects formed living letters in the dirt. The planet itself was starting to rewrite. And still, the sphere pulsed, now glowing bright enough to blind anyone who looked directly at it. Reina Talos stood in front of it, now alone. No guards, no technicians, just her and the sound of her own breath and the hum of something older than human time. She knelt, and she whispered, "Do it. Finish what we interrupted." The sphere stopped pulsing, just for a moment. And then it cracked, not like something breaking, but like a shell hatching. A shape emerged. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't organic. It was conceptual. It was a shape the human mind couldn't process, but the brain tried anyway. Reina wept, not from pain, but from recognition. She remembered now. She remembered the first cycle, the first mistake. She whispered the name they weren't supposed to know. And the Harbingers answered. Not with words, but with light. The same kind of light that isn't light at all, but memory. It washed over Earth like a wave, and for the first time in the entire galaxy, there was silence, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Obedience, submission, return. 1 hour later, Earth's surface was changed. Not destroyed, not burned, just different. The cities were gone. But not rubble, just no longer there. Forests grew in their place, structures of a design long lost to the stars. People who survived looked the same, but weren't. They spoke new tongues. They moved in sync. They remembered 2 lifetimes and chose the older one. The overwrite was complete, not 1 shot fired, not 1 rebellion, just correction. And up in the sky, where the harbingers had once hovered, there was nothing now, not even a shadow. They had moved on. Their work here was finished. The silence returned. And this time it wasn't mercy. It was a reset. At the very edge of the solar system, a tiny satellite blinked its last signal back toward Earth. The one sent by the outpost on Neptune's 3rd moon. It contained only 1 message, 1 final desperate thought before contact was lost. They didn't invade. We woke them up, and they made us remember why we chose to forget. Not everything was gone. Not everyone had changed. In the corners of the Earth, the harbingers hadn't touched directly. Underground caverns, old bunkers buried beneath continents, rogue ships floating in deep orbit. There were still remnants of the first humanity. Broken pieces. Survivors. People who hadn't fully overwritten. Some were immune, others just hadn't been found yet. And a few, they resisted. Among them was a man named Ryan. He didn't remember how he survived. One day he'd been in a cryo-sleep chamber during a military test run on the dark side of Mercury. Next thing he knew, the sun had dimmed, and every channel was gone. It was like waking up to a world that had already ended and was now pretending to be fine. The first person he saw in the open wasn't human. She looked human, walked like one, even smiled the way humans do. But when she turned her eyes on him, Rain saw something hollow behind them. Not evil, not robotic, just empty of self, as if her soul had been replaced with an ancient copy. She asked him a question, but it wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language he knew. And yet he understood it completely. "Why do you still wear that name?" He didn't answer. He ran. That was 6 days ago. Now he was somewhere in the remains of northern Canada, walking through forests that didn't match any Earth map. The trees were taller than skyscrapers, with black leaves that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. The air smelled different too, crisp but not natural, too precise, engineered. Every now and then he'd hear singing, always distant, always female, like a chorus of memories that didn't belong to him. He slept in abandoned tunnels, ate what old rations he found in emergency pods. He didn't trust the food from the new Earth, the plants that shimmered slightly in the dark, or the animals that had too many eyes. Rain wasn't a scientist. He didn't understand what the sphere was, or what the harbingers had really done. But he understood this. Something had rewritten humanity's story, and he was still holding the torn-out page they'd missed. In a remote mountain facility that had gone dark years before the overwrite, a woman named Marin was keeping records. Old ones, not digital, handwritten, on paper. She knew the systems couldn't be trusted. Ever since the dream broadcasts started, any AI, network, or implant could be hijacked. She'd seen her own assistant strangle himself with a neural cord after a memory that wasn't his tried to rewrite his name. So she used ink. Her hands shook as she wrote. But she kept going. She wasn't a scientist either, not anymore. Just a survivor with a broken mind and a pile of notebooks filled with the truth. She called it the Echo Protocol, a collection of stories from those who still remembered the world before the rewrite. Their names, their families, their losses. All scribbled in crumbling notebooks, buried under concrete slabs, hidden in oxygen tanks and under floorboards. She didn't think it would change anything, but she wrote anyway. "If we forget who we were," she whispered one night, "then whatever we are now has already won." Meanwhile, far above Earth, in a drifting, powerless station orbiting Saturn's outer ring, a child was born. A real child. Human. Not overwritten, not touched. Her parents had fled the rewrite just in time, escaped through a quantum drive that sent them barely far enough to avoid the signal. They hadn't known she was pregnant. The trauma of the escape delayed everything. But when she was born, they knew. The baby didn't speak, didn't cry. She sang, not in notes, but in vibrations that made the air around her shimmer, like memory and sound. It wasn't human, but it wasn't elder either. It was new. The first new thing in a galaxy full of old copies. Her father named her Ellen. Her mother wept. Ellen never learned Earth's languages. She didn't need to. She spoke something else, a mix of dreams and symbols, emotions and pure thought. And she remembered too, but not like the others. She remembered both versions of humanity, the one before and the one that existed now. And she chose neither. Back on Earth, the world looked calm. No more panic, no more chaos. The rewritten moved through cities of glowing stone and silver-blue trees, tending to technologies that hummed with quiet wisdom. They didn't speak unless necessary. They didn't fight. There was no war, no politics, no hunger. To some, it looked like paradise. But it wasn't peace, it was stillness. A stillness that didn't come from resolution, but from surrender. The Harbingers had left. The Velsphere had vanished, along with Dr. Talos and the entire Mariana complex. No explosion, no collapse, just missing. And the rewritten didn't ask questions, because they were complete now. They didn't need answers. But something was changing again. Subtly. People began seeing things, reflections that didn't match their movements, shadows that lingered too long, faces in the water that weren't theirs. The overwrite was cracking, not breaking, but flickering. Just enough for the questions to return. And with questions came names. Not the old names, not the overwritten ones either. New names, the kind born from resistance, from memory fighting back. Rain eventually made his way to what used to be Alaska, now a glowing tundra, humming with unnatural winds. There, he found something no one expected to still exist. A beacon. Old, rusted, but working. Its signal was analog, beyond the Harbinger's reach. He turned it on. It sent out a message in Morse code, repeating every 30 minutes. A message that said only one word. Awake. Marin picked it up in her notebook bunker. So did Ellen's parents on their drifting station, and others. Scattered across the solar system, the unwritten began to respond. Some were children, others were soldiers. A few were AI constructs that had been disconnected before the broadcast began. All of them had something in common. They were out of sync with the rewrite. Not immune, not special, just offbeat. And in that offbeat, something new was blooming. Not rebellion, but remembrance. Ellen began drawing symbols on the glass of the ship. Symbols that none of the AI systems could read, but that matched carvings found in the ruins of the Vault of Velsar, the same vault where humanity had first triggered the chain of events leading to their rewrite. The vault wasn't just a warning. It was a door. And Ellen held the key. She began to speak of another place. Not the rewritten Earth, not the old one, but a third version. A place between memory and dream, where choice still mattered, where stories still changed. She called it the Hollow, and every time she said it, reality around her bent slightly, not violently, just enough to remind her parents that the rules weren't fully settled anymore. The overwrite wasn't as perfect as the Harbingers had believed. They had erased humanity's past, but they hadn't locked its future. On Earth, small cracks were spreading. In the overwritten cities, statues of the Harbingers began to crumble. Plants grew wrong. People looked in mirrors and saw faces they didn't recognize, not frightening ones, just familiar in a way they couldn't explain. The overwritten began dreaming again. And this time, the dreams weren't from the elders. They were from themselves. Rhine's message continued to broadcast, and now more voices joined it, not in Morse, in whispers, in stories, in names. The rewrite was faltering. Not fast, but enough. Enough for hope to slip through, enough for something unwritten to begin. The cold didn't bite like it used to. Rain noticed that first. The air in the tundra was sharp and dry, but it didn't sting his skin or make his breath fog. It just existed, like everything else now. Too quiet, too balanced. Like the world had been given rules it wasn't allowed to break anymore. He crouched beside the beacon again, checking the signal manually. No power failures, no interruptions. It pulsed steadily. Awake. Every 30 minutes. He didn't expect a response, not directly, but something was happening. Every time it transmitted, the snow around the tower melted just a little wider. The trees nearby leaned closer, like they were listening. He wasn't alone anymore. 2 days ago, a woman had found him. No overwritten smile, no glowing skin, just tired eyes, cracked lips, and a rifle slung across her shoulder. She called herself Wren. She hadn't spoken much, but the moment she heard the beacon's tone, she'd started to cry, not out of sadness, but because she recognized it. "It's from before," she'd whispered. "Before the dream. Before everything went silent." They didn't talk about what they'd lost, what the world had become. That part didn't need words. It was in every step they took, every unnatural silence in the forest, every flicker of static that danced across the snow. They walked without direction, not to escape. There was nowhere left to escape to. But something was pulling them, not in a physical way, in a memory way. Rain felt it deep in his chest, a tug, a rhythm, and when they finally came across the ruins of an old city, not the rewritten ones, but a broken human city half eaten by time, they both stopped. It was Anchorage, or what was left of it. Only it wasn't supposed to still be here. The rewrite had erased all human cities, replaced them with structures grown from memory and machine. But this place still stood, cracked and leaning, soaked in rust and frost, but real, human-built, old world. And someone had been here. On the wall of an old metro tunnel, scrawled in black ink across steel, was a phrase neither of them had seen in years. "We are more than what they remember." Wren ran her fingers over the words. "Someone's resisting," she murmured. "Not hiding. Resisting." Rain stared at the tunnel's mouth. "Then we're not alone." They didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, because the air was shifting again. The gravity felt off, like something massive had moved just out of sight. And in the sky, a thin crack appeared. Not a literal crack, but a line where the stars shimmered too brightly. A seam in the rewrite's illusion. Royan didn't understand how he knew it. But that's what it was. A seam. And something behind it was watching. Far from Earth, on the edge of the Sol system, the girl Ellen stood against the transparent observation wall of her ship. Her eyes never blinked, not when she looked at the stars, not when she hummed her strange non-language into the quiet. She had stopped aging. Her parents didn't know what to do. They no longer argued or questioned it. They'd moved past confusion and into awe. Their daughter wasn't changing into something else. She was becoming what had always been possible, had the rewrite not happened. She was an echo of the old and a beacon for the new. And she had started drawing the same symbol over and over, a spiral broken at the center. A mark once found in the vault of Velsar. the same shape now appearing in random places across the overwritten earth, in tree rings, in ripples of water, in the veins of rewritten leaves. She called it the Hollow's Eye, and she said it wasn't just a symbol, it was a door. Back on Earth, Marin had left her bunker. Her notebooks, all of them, were sealed in crates and left behind. She no longer needed to write what she remembered, because she was beginning to live it again. Each step she took through the distorted forests brought memories to the surface of lives she never lived, yet felt deeply familiar. A soldier on a planet with 6 moons. A mother who watched her daughter dissolve into light. A prisoner trapped in a dream loop until time collapsed. All versions of herself, all overwritten, but now returning. Not as trauma, as possibility. She wasn't sure if that was hope or another trick. But she walked anyway. Because the world was breaking again, not into chaos, but into choice. And the rewritten began to feel it, too. In the cities of glass and light, the people started to glitch. Small things. A woman who dropped a dish and screamed, not because it broke, but because she didn't understand why she felt loss. A boy who stared into the water and said a name that wasn't his, and cried like it had always belonged to him. Emotion returned. Disobedience followed. They started asking questions. They started dreaming outside the parameters of the Harbinger's rewrite. They saw reflections of themselves making different decisions. They argued. They refused. And some even left, walked into the wilderness to find the source of the signal they heard pulsing through their bones. Rayan's beacon. By the 3rd week, more than 24 had joined him and Ren. Some were broken. Some could barely speak. But all of them carried the same ache in their minds, the ache of almost remembering. Together, they moved south, toward a place none of them could name, yet all instinctively recognized. They were converging, drawn by something older than the elders, older than the rewrite, older than the vaults that sealed their past away. It wasn't rebellion. It was realignment, a course correction inside the correction. And they weren't the only ones moving. In the rewritten city once known as Santiago, a woman named Lyra stood before a gathering of hundreds. Her body shimmered with the same post-rewrite glow as the others. But her mind burned with clarity. She was a sleeper, one who had passed through the rewrite but somehow kept her memories buried inside. And now they were returning. She spoke not with fury, but with sorrow. "I remember a world where we made mistakes," she said to the silent crowd, "and loved people even when they hurt us, where we broke things and healed, where we were not balanced, but we were alive." Her voice cracked, and I would trade this perfect quiet for a single day of that chaos again. The crowd didn't cheer, but one by one, they stood, not as a mob, as mourners, and something shifted in the architecture around them. A pulse, like the city had felt their grief and remembered it used to be broken too. Cracks formed in the towers, not collapse, release. The Harbingers had not returned, but their silence no longer meant control. It meant retreat. The overwrite was being challenged, not with weapons, with memory, with choice, with something the elders had not predicted, not fully. Resilience born not from defiance, but from sorrow. Back in orbit, Ellen began her descent. Her parents begged her not to go, but she only smiled. "I'm not going to change the world," she said. "I'm going to meet it halfway." The ship's hull began to glow as she approached the upper layers of the atmosphere. Satellites nearby shut down, sensors failed, but the Earth, the real Earth, welcomed her. Where she landed, the snow melted in spirals. Where she walked, the trees bowed, and those who saw her did not fear. They knelt, not to worship, but in recognition of something new, something between what was and what could be. Rain was the first to meet her. No words were exchanged. She looked into his eyes, and in that instant he remembered everything: his wife, his daughter, the vault, the warning, the final shot fired into the darkness. The moment they realized too late what they'd unleashed. He fell to his knees, and Ellen put her hand on his shoulder. "Get up," she whispered. "You're still human." They walked in silence for a while. Rain didn't know where they were going, but Ellen seemed to. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. Her presence was its own kind of voice, a soft vibration that ran through the trees, through the ground, even the air. Nature responded to her like she belonged here in a way no one else did. Around them, the world still looked rewritten. The trees were taller than they had ever grown in Earth's old days. The grass shimmered under moonlight, and the sky, once familiar, now shifted colors between violet and dark blue, like the stars had been smeared with ink. The laws of reality here were still different. Still under the influence of the harbingers. But something had changed, and it was spreading. The moment Rain had touched her, it was like a dam in his head had cracked. The memories didn't come back all at once. They came in fragments, scenes that didn't belong to this timeline. He remembered standing in a control room high above the lunar core, watching the vault open. He remembered someone screaming in a language that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. He remembered the look on Dr. Talos's face before the light hit them all. And he remembered being rewritten. His mind fought the memories like a body rejecting poison. But they didn't feel toxic. They felt true, as if the person he was now had only ever been a temporary lie. Wren had felt it too. She walked a few steps behind them, her eyes scanning the glowing forest. She wasn't talking much either, but her expression had softened. The edge of her survivor's armor had worn down. "We're going to find it," Ellen finally said, as they reached the edge of a massive clearing. Rain turned to her. "Find what?" She pointed toward the horizon. In the distance, past a ridge that still held the faint silhouette of a rewritten city, was a structure that didn't belong to either world. Not the old Earth, not the rewritten one. Something in between. A tall, thin spire, not built but grown. Its surface shimmered like glass but breathed like skin. It pulsed gently with a color no one could name, a color that didn't exist in the electromagnetic spectrum. "That," Ellen said softly, "is where it all began." The others had arrived by then. Dozens of them, the unwritten, drawn by Rain's beacon, and the stories passed from mouth to mouth in quiet places. Some of them still had fragments of the rewrite clinging to their faces. Others had already begun to return to who they used to be. And a few, just a few, were like Ellen. Not exactly restored, but transformed. Not overwritten, not reborn, but rewritten by choice. They sat around campfires built with old scrap and scavenged wood. Some of them carried weapons. Others just stared into the flames. But no one spoke loudly. They didn't need to. Everyone here knew what they were walking toward. Rain sat with Wren, staring up at the unnatural stars. "You believe she can undo it?" Wren asked quietly. Rain shook his head. "No." "You don't believe in her?" "I didn't say that," he said. "I just don't think it's about undoing anything." "Then what is it about?" He looked over at Ellen, who sat across the clearing, drawing new symbols in the dirt, her fingers moving like she was playing an instrument no one else could hear. "It's about remembering something older than all of this," he said, "and deciding whether we still want to be human after we know the whole truth." Marin found them the next day. She'd walked nearly 300 miles through what used to be South America, following nothing but instincts and strange symbols that appeared in her dreams. Her boots were falling apart. Her coat was torn. But her eyes were alive. She didn't hesitate when she reached the group. She went straight to Ellen. "I've seen that tower," she said, pointing to the spire. Ellen looked up. "In a dream." Maren shook her head. "No, in another life. Before the rewrite." Rain stood up. "You were there." "I was one of the first researchers at the vault. I handled the linguistics decoding of the Elder's warning. I was the one who deciphered the phrase, 'become unmade.'" Ren's voice came sharp. "And you still opened it?" Maren didn't flinch. "I didn't think we'd triggered anything. I thought we'd been invited." She sat down, her legs trembling from exhaustion. "And maybe we were," she whispered, "but not to power, not to knowledge, to truth, and we weren't ready to hear it." The spire pulsed again, and something shifted. Across the camp, several people collapsed at once, not from pain, but from impact. Their minds had been hit with a wave of memory, sharp, fast, uncontrollable. Rain saw flashes of it in his own head, millions of humans on distant worlds, rising and falling through cycles of time, wars that bent space, civilizations that erased their own histories to escape what they'd learned, and always the harbingers, watching, correcting, preserving a balance that had been broken long before Earth ever lit its first fire. The rewrite was never personal. It was a protocol. Humanity had tripped the failsafe. And now? Now they were walking toward the last fragment of a choice they weren't supposed to have anymore. When they reached the spire's base, the forest bent away. Literally. The trees leaned back like living things in the presence of something older than memory. The spire was taller than it looked, stretching hundreds of feet into the sky, disappearing into the cloud layer. Its surface shimmered when you looked directly at it. But if you looked from the corner of your eye, you could see images within it. People, cities, memories, versions of yourself that hadn't existed, yet did. The air here was heavy, thick with possibility. And then Ellen stepped forward. Her bare feet touched the soil at the edge of the spire's root system. She looked up, her small frame shaking slightly. Not with fear, with knowing. "This is the hollow," she said. Maren stepped beside her. "The place between." "Yes," Ellen whispered. "The rewrite couldn't reach it. The elders left it untouched. They had to." "Why?" Rain asked. "Because even the elders feared what lived in memory." The group gathered behind them, and Ellen turned. "We are not here to fight," she said. Her voice was louder now, older. "We are here to choose." They stepped into the spire, one by one. Inside, there were no walls, no stairs, no ceilings, just a field of stars, floating memories like suspended particles in liquid time, and voices. Not threatening, just familiar. Whispers from every version of every life. Some beautiful, some monstrous, some peaceful. Each person who entered the spire was shown their full self, what they'd been, what they could be, what the rewrite had tried to delete. And then they were given a choice. Forget again, or remember fully. Rain stepped forward first. The memories hit him like lightning. He saw his daughter, not the rewritten version, not the old one, but one who had never existed, and yet had lived in the hollow all along. A child born of his fears and hopes, sacrificed when the sphere was taken. He wept until his knees gave out. And then he stood. "I will remember her," he said. The spire accepted him. One by one they chose. Some broke under the weight, others were changed, but not a single one turned away, because now they knew. The rewrite hadn't removed their humanity. It had paused it, put it on hold until they were ready. The elders had warned them, but they'd also given them a door, a last chance. And it was called the Hollow. Outside, the sky cracked again. This time it didn't shimmer. It opened. The harbingers returned, not with weapons, but with presence. They hovered, still and silent, above the horizon, watching. And Ellen stepped out of the spire. She raised her hand, not in defiance, in acknowledgement. "I remember what you took," she said. "I remember why. And I forgive you." The harbingers pulsed once, and left. Just like that. Gone. No sound, no destruction, just absence, because now humanity had remembered. And there was nothing left for the elders to fix. They woke up differently now. Not from sleep, from layers. That's what Rain had started calling it, peeling back layers of reality that had once buried them. The rewrite hadn't just changed the world. It had stacked it, hidden it under glimmering truths that weren't really lies, just masks. Comforting illusions made by the harbingers to preserve something that had long ago broken. But the people who had entered the Hollow, they weren't the same anymore. Not overwritten, not restored, whole. And they were beginning to see the truth. The rewrite was never meant to destroy them. It was meant to contain them, a way to lock away the parts of the human spirit that scared even the elders, not just ambition, not rage, not innovation, but memory, the unfiltered kind. The kind that builds civilizations but also burns them down, the kind that remembers pain and hope, the kind that rewrites itself without permission. Ellen stood at the top of the spire, her eyes closed, both palms open. She was listening, not to sound, but to threads, echoes stretching across time and space. The Hollow had reconnected her to something ancient, something deep in the core of every human being. Choice. That was what had always made them dangerous. The elders hadn't feared war or rebellion. They feared improvisation. They feared that humans would keep writing their own endings, no matter how many times the story was erased. Across the world, the signal had spread. Not a digital one, not a hack, but a psychic pulse carried by emotion, memory, and dream. The people in the rewritten cities began hearing voices in their own heads, not alien, their own voices, versions of themselves speaking from behind the veil. Some resisted, some collapsed, some began to weep uncontrollably as memories poured in, children they never had, battles they never fought, songs they never sang. It wasn't insanity, it was restoration. A few went mad. But most? They changed, not all at once, not perfectly, but willingly. They left their glass towers. They returned to forests, caves, and frozen ruins. They began building fires, carving symbols in stone, relearning things they'd once abandoned. Not because they wanted to return to the past, but because they wanted to reclaim what had been buried. A world where pain existed alongside beauty, where struggle walked beside joy, where freedom was dangerous, but real. Rain, Wren, and Maren stood together at the base of the spire, watching the sky. Above them the crack had grown wider, a vast seam in the stars stretching across half the hemisphere. It wasn't a wound. It wasn't even threatening. It was a threshold. And something was on the other side. Watching. Not the harbingers. They were gone now. Their work complete. Their control no longer needed. But behind them, something far older stirred. The elders themselves. The ones who had written the first laws of memory. The ones who had built the vaults, who had warned humanity and then punished them. And now they were waiting. It began at the edge of the Pacific Rim. A shape appeared in the sky. Not a ship. Not a god, a presence, impossibly vast, woven from shifting symbols and liquid geometry. It didn't move. It existed. Like a thought becoming visible. People across the globe dropped to their knees. Some screamed, others sang. The air pulsed with meaning, even though no one heard words. The elders had arrived. And for the first time, they were not hiding behind machines. They were speaking directly. The message was not spoken aloud. It bloomed in every mind simultaneously, like a wave of cold light. You have remembered. That was not part of the design. The hollow wasn't meant to be entered again. What you do next will shape not only yourselves, but the next story. Proceed with understanding, or be undone by your own memory. Wren gritted her teeth as the message rang through her skull. They're giving us a final choice, she muttered. Ryan nodded. They don't know what we'll do. Marin looked to Ellen. And do we? Ellen opened her eyes. No, she said, but we'll write it anyway. She stepped forward, out from the hollow's edge and into the open clearing, where the elder presence cast shadows that twisted in impossible angles. She lifted her head. I know you can hear me, she said, her voice carried by more than sound. I know you remember the first cycle, the one before you cleansed us. The elder presence shimmered in reply. That version was unstable. You consumed yourselves. We erased it to preserve your potential. We were merciful. Ellen nodded. Yes, but mercy without consent is still control. There was silence, and then, would you rather extinction? She paused. No, she said. I would rather consequence. Pain is part of what makes growth real. She took a breath. We are not asking for release. She looked back at Ren, at the camp where hundreds of unwritten now stood watching. We are claiming authorship. The ground shook, not in violence, in acknowledgement. The elder presence pulsed, and the seam in the sky began to close. Not to trap, to seal, like a book being returned to the shelf, but not forgotten. A story with a beginning, a middle, and now, a new ending. Ellen turned to the others. They're leaving. Wren stepped up beside her. Because we passed their test? Ellen smiled. No, because we stopped treating life like one. In the weeks that followed, the Earth did not return to its old state. The Harbingers did not fix what was broken. The rewritten cities remained, but now empty. Museums of what was almost permanent. The hollow pulsed with new light, accessible only to those who remembered willingly. And humanity began again. Not from rubble, but from realization. They did not rebuild skyscrapers first. They built stories, shared memories, songs from lives that had been rewritten, now stitched together in rituals, symbols, and murals across every continent. Children were taught truth, not just what happened, but what almost did. They were told, we were unmade, and we chose to be made again. They were not taught to fear the elders. They were taught to question them, to honor the mercy, but never forget the cost of silence. Rain and Wren traveled together now, not as survivors, as storytellers. They moved from settlement to settlement, telling the truth, the whole truth, not to scare, not to warn, to inspire. One night, a child asked Rain, "Will the elders ever come back?" He looked at her with a soft smile. "Maybe," he said, "but if they do, they won't find the same people." And Ellen? She returned to the hollow, alone, but not lonely. She sat at the center, where the spire's light now flowed like a stream through the soil. She was aging again, by choice. She'd stepped out of the myth and back into the story. And as the years passed, people came to the hollow not to worship her, but to ask her the one question the rewrite had tried to erase forever. What should I become? And she always answered the same way. You already are. Time moved differently now. Not faster, not slower, just more honestly. There were no more centralized governments, no global leaders claiming to own the future. What replaced them weren't empires, but circles. Groups of people, scattered across the earth and the colonies, sharing knowledge, memories, and stories, like currency. The Hollow didn't rule over them. It guided them, not like a god, more like a compass, a reminder, a place where you could enter and sit with who you used to be, all the versions of yourself, even the broken ones, and come back changed. Not better, just clearer. Some people went once and never returned. Others visited every season, as if keeping an appointment with the part of themselves that still asked questions. Ellen remained at the Hollow for many years. She didn't lead, she didn't command, she simply was there, present, listening, watching as more and more people came not to be fixed, but to understand. And in doing so, the world didn't heal like it used to. It grew new skin. The Earth that came after the rewrite wasn't clean or perfect or wise. It was honest, messy, free. And that was enough. Rain and Wren kept walking. Years had passed since the spire cracked open and the harbingers vanished. But they still carried the story with them, the real one. They told it in half-collapsed barns, in desert outposts, in orbiting refugee stations rebuilt into gardens. They told it to children born in the Hollow's glow, and to old women who still remembered the cold silence of the rewritten years. One night, in the remains of a city once known as Nairobi, they sat with a circle of strangers around a low fire. The youngest boy asked them, "Why didn't the elders just kill us when we disobeyed?" Rain looked up at the stars before answering. "They didn't need to," he said quietly. "They thought they had already won. But they didn't." "No," Wren added, "because we remembered something they couldn't calculate." The boy frowned. "What's that?" Wren smiled. "The power of a story that refuses to die." The boy thought about it for a while, then asked, "What if they come back?" Rain leaned forward. "Then we'll tell them a new story." On the moon, where the scar from the Harbinger's beam still ran like a black vein across the surface, a group of researchers built a monument. Not to war, not to victory, to the crack. It had never been repaired. It wasn't supposed to be. It stood there now, silent and unsealed, a jagged reminder of the moment humanity almost lost itself completely. People came from all over to sit at its edge. Some meditated. Some cried. Some just watched the earth from a distance and whispered, "We came back." In the outer systems, colonies once thought lost during the rewrite had begun returning signal. Some had never been touched at all. Others had fought off their own harbingers, unaware of what had happened to Earth, and a few had evolved in entirely different ways. But they all asked the same question when they made contact again. "Did we win?" And Earth replied, "No, we remembered." That answer changed the galaxy. The elders did not return, at least not in the way people feared, but sometimes across certain deserts, certain oceans, certain dead zones where space-time still quivered like the ghost of a past storm, people claimed to see mirrors in the sky, not ships, reflections, of themselves, walking differently, speaking older languages, living different choices. They didn't attack, they didn't speak, they just watched, and eventually they faded. Ellen said they weren't punishments, they were echoes, tests, not of power but of identity. To see if this version of humanity still remembered who it chose to be. Marin, before she passed, had published her last notebook, not in print, in carvings, stone tablets set into the walls of the Hollow's inner chamber. It was called the Memory Declaration. It was short, Only a few lines. We were erased. We were rewritten. And still, we remembered. So now memory belongs to us. Let no one take it again. Pilgrims copied those lines across entire star systems. Not for politics, not for pride, but to remember how close the story came to ending without ever being finished. Ellen eventually left the hollow. Quietly, without ceremony. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't need to. People say she boarded an old shuttle and disappeared into the stars. Others say she turned into starlight the moment she walked beyond the trees. But Rain didn't believe either. He believed she went looking. Not for the elders, not for answers, but for the next version of humanity. One that hadn't been born yet. One that would also forget one day. And would also remember. In time, Earth changed again. Its cities were never rebuilt as they had been. Instead, people lived in clusters, circles, walkable towns with sky farms and ground-level libraries. There were no leaders anymore, just recorders, individuals who listened, documented, and shared. They didn't make decisions for others. They asked questions, wrote answers, and passed them on. The rewritten structures still stood, like ancient ruins. No one destroyed them. They were important, symbols of what it meant to live in comfort without freedom, of safety without choice. Tourists came to walk through those empty towers. Kids laughed at how quiet they were, how blank the rooms looked. And then they went home and built messy huts full of color, noise, and art. No one wanted perfection anymore. They wanted life. Every year, on the anniversary of the Hollow's opening, people gathered in every city, every station, every scattered place humanity had planted its flag again. They didn't celebrate with parades or fireworks. They sat and told stories, sometimes real, sometimes not. Didn't matter. What mattered was that they chose them, together. They called it the remembering. And on the 1,000th day since the rewrite cracked, an anomaly appeared at the edge of the Kuiper Belt. No warning, no threat. Just a symbol, carved into ice by something too precise to be natural. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a weapon. It was a question mark, floating in deep space, waiting. Rain was old by then, gray-bearded, slower in his steps, but sharp-eyed as ever. He looked at the image on the screen and laughed. Ren, still beside him after all these years, raised an eyebrow. "What's so funny? They still don't get it," he said. "Who?" "The elders, or whoever's out there now." She tilted her head. "What don't they get?" Rain looked out the window of the ship. The stars were endless. He smiled. "That we're not looking for the answer anymore. We're just enjoying the next chapter." The story didn't end. It never really could, because the truth that saved humanity wasn't a weapon or a miracle. It wasn't technology. It wasn't even Ellen. It was the simple, powerful, unstoppable fact that people kept remembering. Even when they were told to